Hello, friends! Welcome back to Hello, Friends, the Mr. Robot Review Show. My name is Kyle, your host every single episode. Welcome to episode 12 of Hello, Friends. This is season 2, episode 2. I just got done watching it, and thank you for joining me. If you haven't seen the show before, I'm going to be reviewing every episode of Mr. Robot. We're going to be going through the plot mostly, the White Rose Award at the end for the Best Actor or Actress, a score, and that's pretty much it. So without further ado, here we go. So season 2, episode 2 of Mr. Robot. It's Christmas time. We start off with Christmas and a red bucket we can dump change into. There's a little Santa doing his little thing there. And we have Mobley and Ramiro, and Ramiro tells Mobley the story of how F Society came to be. Essentially, he says, it was eventually a freak show, where he's like, the dwarves did all the business, and you came to see all these freaks and all these different things. Kind of reminded me of that Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, with the Freak book, which is a great episode. Curb Your Enthusiasm is an amazing show, so maybe one day we'll review that, but probably not, but who knows? Maybe we'll see. But eventually it was brought up by a woman in 1986 here. Ramiro tells Mobley a story about how she installed a bar so she could get drunk with her friends. She got a little hammered one night and she was playing pool and the pool stick went through her neck. And he's like, it killed her clean. And I was like, oof. Mobley's like, why are you telling me this, dude? He's like, look, just listen. He's like, this arcade was bought in the year 2000. And he's like, it was named the Fun Society Amusement LLC. He's like, why someone wanted to start an arcade in the year 2000, I don't know. But anyway, it was a guy and his dad and then their brother. And he goes on to say that the oldest son ends up shooting his father because he wanted to sell it and the father wouldn't let him. So he ends up shooting the dad in the face. But what he didn't consider is the kickback from the gun, which actually pushed the son back and fell out of a 20-story window. And as Ramiro says, his head popped like a watermelon when he met the ground there. This woke up his twin brother, Clyde, and then he says by the time Clyde got his bearings, the police were there, and he was arrested for the double homicide of his brother and his father when he was just sleeping, which is crazy. And Mobley's like, how do you know all this? And he's like, well, Clyde was my cellmate when I was in jail. He's like, this dude believes the F Society arcade is haunted and it's the nexus of all evil. So that was a cool little bit. But Ramiro says, I'm too broke to be superstitious. And it turns out Mobley is trying to get Ramiro to work with him. And I was like, oh, this is the beginning of F Society. This is like when they first start and Mobley and Ramiro meet. And Mobley is actually trying to pitch Ramiro here and be like, hey man, I need you for a job. He's like, this one's going to change the world. And he's like, I don't know, man. I just got out. I'm not trying to get back in. And he's like, money better talk, because he's like, I'm broke. And he's like, it's going to pay out. He's like, all the debts are going to be taken care of there. And so they're like, all right, I'll consider it. And they go outside. Ramiro locks the front of the F Society. And we get a pan up. And then we get the Mr. Robot title card. And this is accompanied by Dusty Springfield's You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. And this is a really cool music. All of the music in Mr. Robot is really good. This one, again, hits the nail on the head, where it's got the old-timey vibe, but it's got sort of a new sensation, too. So this is cool. We get some shots of, like, the city, some overhead shots of the skyscrapers. And then eventually we get Elliot talking to us, where Elliot says, panic. Here it comes again. Remember? That sudden sensation of fear, overwhelming fear, burrows its way inside my brain, making itself at home, nesting, screaming in my mind. And we get a slow pan up to the red phone cord, where we left off last episode, where Elliot picks up and Tyrell Wellick says, bonsoir, Elliot. We catch right back up to Elliot here. They have a quick conversation. Elliot asks Tyrell where he is. And Tyrell says, not yet where I'm supposed to be, but soon, very soon. And Elliot's like, okay, and where's that? And Tyrell says, I don't think that's a very good idea. He's like, it's not safe to talk about right now. And Mr. Robot comes over and slams the phone, and he hangs up the phone, and Mr. Robot's coming in hot here. he's pissed, and he like slams the wall a couple times. I like aggressive Mr. Robot, because Mr. Robot, as we know, he's here to save Elliot. He's here to break Elliot free of everything that's going on there. And he's kind of getting impatient. He's getting a little pissed because Elliot's trying to, get control and push out Mr. Robot. And he's like, listen, man. He's like, I'm here to break you out. And he's like, you're coming against me. He's like, I got to ramp it up. I got to step it up. And so he hangs up the phone and he says, we had a deal. He goes, you talk to him. I delivered my part. And Mr. Robot says, it's not my fault that he's Looney Tunes, which means he's lost it. And he goes, what more do you want? And I put in my notes here, Mr. Robot's getting aggressive, which we just talked about. And then we get a cut to, they see the TV in the background there, and they find out that Gideon Goddard has been murdered, and they're both first finding out about this, and they're kind of taken aback. We get a cut to Mobley going to see Romero at his house, who lives with his mom upstairs. And Mobley goes down there, and he finds that Romero has been murdered. And I was like, oh shit, because I did not remember this. And again, I don't remember a lot of these things as they're happening, so this is kind of like a new watch for me. This is a rewatch for me, but it's also like a whole bunch of stuff I haven't seen in 6 or 7 years, or whenever season 2 came out. Probably not that long, but at least 4 or 5 years. So I haven't seen it since the original air date. I don't remember a lot of this and watching it all in succession. I didn't know Romero was off this early, but we find Romero very dead. He's laying down in a pool of blood there. Mobley can't believe it, because he's down in like his little garden or whatever, where Mr. Robot actually visited him in season 1 there, when he like holds the gun up to him and he says, "You're crazy, man." But Romero is done, and this episode kicks off with a bang. Then we cut to a sad scene where we see Ray, played by Craig Robinson, who's having breakfast, and he's talking to, which we find out is his dead wife, where he's hooked up to his dialysis machine, and he's talking out loud. And it first cuts in on Craig Robinson, so he thinks he's having a conversation, and then it turns out he's talking to no one, because there's a wide shot of him at the dining room table, and there's no one sitting across, which is really, really sweet and really sad and heartbreaking as well. Then we go to the park where Elliot and Leon meet up, and Leon gives him some pills. And there's a great line by Leon, where he played by Joey Badass, and he says, "I ain't your keeper, and I sure don't want to be your reaper." And Joey Badass has always got some great lines in this show, and he plays a really great character in Leon. But Mr. Robot shows up and he says, "Oh, we're back on the morphine, huh?" He goes, "What's that going to accomplish?" And Elliot tells to us it's not morphine, it's actually Adderall. But he doesn't tell that to Mr. Robot. And so Elliot tries to kind of avoid Mr. Robot, and he starts walking away, and Mr. Robot cuts him off, and he's like, "Man, you gotta stop running away from me." And Elliot says, to spite him, really, Elliot takes the bottle, and he just keeps popping the Adderall. And he just like looks Mr. Robot in the face, and he pops like a whole bottle of Adderall. And then Elliot is talking to us, and he talks about an internal fatal error, which is going to be the title of this episode here. The Men in Black are back. They capture Elliot. Again, we don't know if these Men in Black are real, or if they're just in Elliot's mind here, if they're working with E-Corp, or what's going on. But we did have Krista, I think, asking Elliot about the Men in Black last season. So as far as we know, these are only in Elliot's mind, and seems to be only when he's doing morphine or Adderall, or when he's out of his natural mind, when he's on drugs. So they take Elliot captive, and they put him in the car, similar to how he was in E-Corp in the first season. We cut to a homeless man with a cup that says, "Lost my money and lost my mind." And I'm like, same, dude. Like, I feel that. But Mobley's on the subway, and Darlene comes over and sits next to him. This is right after the police are like looking at Mobley, kind of strange, and Mobley's kind of trying to play it cool, but he's also wondering, like, why are you looking at me like that? But Darlene shows up, and she says, I warned you he was a liability because of the drugs. So we're thinking maybe this was a drug deal, or Romero was doing drugs on the side, or selling drugs, and he got popped for it. And Mobley's like, "Why are you being an asshole, man?" He's like, Mobley and Romero obviously hung out, and they were pretty close. And Mobley's like, "Dude, we just lost someone." And Darlene's just like, "I told you he was a liability. He was a problem." So one member of society is already gone, and they already had such a small group to begin with. So Elliot is taken to a parking garage where he's zip tied to a chair, and then we get a red wheelbarrow. It shows up, some foreshadowing here, which we won't get into, but that was really cool to see. That pulls up and it's filled with cement here. They take a funnel and the men in black start funneling the cement down Elliot's throat. Ugh, gross. Obviously not real cement, and they obviously didn't do this to Rami Malek, but really, really gross and really convincing looking. But they shove this down Elliot's throat or funnel down his throat until he starts throwing up. And that's where we cut to Elliot back at home, and he's actually throwing up his Adderall pills covered in vomit. Really gross. But Mr. Robot is at the desk here, and he is in a top hat, similar to the man in the top hat in The Men in Black. And he's reading, and then it looks like writing in Elliot's journal as well. And Mr. Robot tells him, I am burrowed underneath your brain. I am nested there. He says, I am the scream in your mind. And he says, you will cooperate, my son. And he says, I will make you because I own you. I was like, damn, dude, Mr. Robot taking control. Elliot grabs his vomit-covered Adderall and he swallows it because he's losing control and he's freaking out. And the only way to get control back is to swallow those Adderall pills or go on drugs. And, it's so gross because he takes his Adderall and it's covered in his own vomit and he just swallows it. And then he just says, I will not be owned. So that was a really cool scene. We cut to Angela talking to Philip Price there. She goes into his office. He says, all my condolences for your old boss, Gideon. He was a good man. But he's kind of like writing. He's not really like looking at Angela while he's doing it. Philip Price is just writing. Michael Christopher does an excellent job, always as Philip Price. But Angela says, we got to do Bloomberg. We can't be doing Fox. That's where Bloomberg is where it's at. And he's like, sit down. And she's like, okay. She sits down, and he goes over and he sits next to her. And he says, have you ever had dinner at Fidelia's? And she's like, no. And he goes, yeah, it used to be a dive bar, and now it's one of the nicest restaurants in the city. And he says, I know the chef. He's like, I'll send a car to pick you up Saturday at 8 p.m. Angela's like, okay. And then when she's leaving, he says, and you're right, Bloomberg is better than Fox. And right before she leaves, she does look at it like an old historical document that's framed on the wall. I don't know what this is. Honestly, I'm not a history buff, but Philip Price does say, fascinating that a man can change the whole world with a bullet in the right place. And it's like an old-timey shot of a guy going and shooting like a queen or something at the dinner. So that was cool. We cut to Dom alone in her apartment, and according to Alexa, it is 4:03 a.m. She's watching some corny proposal show, and she's reading about Gideon's death there. She gets up, she goes to see where Romero was killed here, as she's working with the FBI, and they were called there. They find a list of names. Dom's name ends up being on there, where it's got the papers, he's like sneezing all over it. She's like, this is really irresponsible. You shouldn't be sneezing, like you're infecting the whole crime scene. That was kind of a weird scene, I thought, but he holds the papers up. There's like a whole list of names from Romero's place. And Dom takes a picture of it, and she zooms in, and it's her name, Dom DiPiero, on there. And so she's like, oh, this is nothing. She's like, every hacker has this. But really, she's like, I should be worried, for sure. Because she's being targeted. So Trenton, Mobley, and Darlene are hiding out in Trenton's parents' house, or like a family house. Darlene says, she'll talk to Elliot, stop spazzing, and be cool. She leaves, and then Mobley tells Trenton, I don't trust her or her crazy brother. And Mobley says, we just committed the crime of the century. And he's like, and now they're trying to cover the tracks. And he goes, right now, we are the tracks. So he's like, we're next, we should be concerned. And then we cut to Ray, who is interrogating this guy. There's a really cool pan around shot. And he's trying to get his help with migrating this Bitcoin issue. This terrified guy, his family is cowering in the corner in the kitchen. And his face is all bruised, and Ray is sitting across from him. And this guy says, I empty the Bitcoin, but every time I do, the server crashes. He's like, we need to migrate it to a more stable server. He's like, I don't know how to do that. We need to get someone. And Ray's disappointed. He walks out. He goes to the van, and he says, the guy's like, oh, we tried to get him to join again. And Ray says, you can beat a dude's face in, but he still don't know what he don't know. So it's it's true. I mean, you can interrogate all you want, but if this guy doesn't know how to fix the problem or fix the server issue, he's not going to help you at all, man. So, interrogating him isn't going to do anything. So we cut to Elliot, who's really happy. He says, Mr. Robot's gone. He's finally gone. And there's a really like fun montage here where he says it was so simple. I'm way more focused. He's like, I'm operating 100%. There's like a montage where he's talking to Leon. He's like, I can talk to people now. And Leon's telling him about Seinfeld. And Elliot's like, that's classic George. Am I right? And it's really cool, like makeup too, because Elliot's like eyes are all, he's like bugging out because he's like hyperactive with the Adderall. And we get just like this incredible montage where he's like, damn, these dishes look immaculate. And he's like holding the dishes up. And then we get the scene, and I didn't know this was in this episode. I forgot about this. This has been memed like all over the place, but he's watching the game of basketball at the park, and he's like, I finally get it. He goes, the ball goes in a hoop, of course. And then he gets up and he goes, woo, slam dunk. And that's an amazing scene because that's how I'm going to be next week when the NBA comes back from quarantine, because I am a big Celtics fan. So me and Elliot, one and the same right there. Elliot then says, I was feeling good. He goes, but this is the 5th day of not sleeping. And he says, there it is again. The burrowing, the nesting, the screaming. He goes, I know, Leon is talking backwards. And the sequence is kind of like glitching out now. We get a shot of 3 little girls wearing like F Society masks. This mask right here. And then he says, my internal fatal error again. He says, so much my system cannot safely recover. He goes, day 6 without sleep. I'm crashing. Next, my consciousness will go. The scream in my mind is coming back. This is all really, really cool dialogue here, talking about Mr. Robot coming back, talking about how he doesn't have any control, which we'll find out Ray talks about in just a bit. But first we cut to Angela, who needs to talk to herself in the mirror again to be like, you are beautiful. You are confident. And I'm like, all right, dude. Like, Angela, you don't have any self-esteem. You can't, like, whatever you gotta do, I guess. But she's going to the dinner. She's feeling good. Well, it turns out it's Philip Price and then 2 other dudes who work at the company. And Angela's kind of surprised by this. I don't know what she was expecting. If it was just going to be her and Philip Price, or if it was just going to be, like, just her on her own, or whatever is happening there. But I don't know if she thinks, like, these guys are just going to hit on her the whole time or what. But she's kind of taken aback, but she sits down. Then we cut to Dom, who's into sexy chat rooms, where she's, like, got some dude chatting with her that's, like, basically having, like, not phone sex, but she's, like, they're, like, typing, like, stuff and whatever. She's, like, touching herself, but then she realizes, like, she, like, she's not getting anything from it. And then she asks Alexa, when will the world end? And Alexa says, in several billion years, when the sun is swallowed by, or she says, like, unless technology fails or there's, like, a global catastrophe, like a pandemic. She says, you know, not for several billion years, when the earth will be swallowed by the sun. And she's like, oh, right. So we cut back to Elliot at his church group, where he says, you know, any second now, he will be back and my mind will be under siege again. Talk about Mr. Robot. And this is a really, really cool scene because Elliot's, like, leaning back, and he's, like, Rami's facial expressions here are just amazing, where he's, like, really good at, like he's out of it, like he's barely conscious, like he's super tripped out on drugs or something. They tell him, you know, God can help you, and there's like, Elliot, is there anything you want to share? And he says, God can help you. He says, why didn't God help my innocent friend who died for no reason, while the guilty roam free? Talking about Gideon Goddard, I think. And then he says, okay, fine, let's skip to that. What about the random wars in his name? And he says, okay, let's skip to random murders. And he says, how about sexism, racism? All because of God, all because of him. And he says, what about dealers getting people hooked on the drug of hope? He says, there is no order, there is no power. And he says, if I don't listen to my imaginary friend, why the fuck should I listen to yours? And then Elliot says to us, please tell me I didn't say all of that out loud. Oh shit, I did. And Elliot just walks away. This is really, really cool. Brings up a good point. I'm not going to get too much into it because I know religion is a very sensitive subject, so I don't want to crossing the lines here. So I thought it was really interesting and brings up some big overall arching points, but just really, really great acting by Rami in that scene. So we cut back to Angela at dinner. Price is basically like, Angela, I'm going to have one more drink if you guys can leave. And they're like, all right, nice meeting you, Angela. Stop by any time. Price is like, those are two good guys. He says one guy's been with the company for 27 years. He's got a kid, blah, blah, blah. The other guy's a good guy. He lives with his mom, whatever. And then he says, and they were also both in the room with Colby when they decided to make that grave decision to cover up the leak that killed your mother. And I'm like, Philip Price is pulling all the strings here. He is the puppeteer, because he specifically invited those two guys to have dinner with Angela so they can kind of get to know each other. And then he's like, oh, by the way, those are two of the guys that helped kill your mom. And so Angela's like sitting there and she's like hurt and she's shocked. And then Philip Price brings up a good point. He says, those are just ordinary men capable of extraordinary things. And Michael Christopher is so good with all of his line deliveries that it's always like creepy and powerful, but really smart. And like, I just put on my notes here, I love Michael Christopher because Philip Price is an awesome character. He hands Angela a disc and he says, there's enough evidence on here to put them away for years. He says, Angela says, I don't trust you. And Philip says, I get it. But he says their lives will be destroyed, if you were to submit this evidence. But he says, the minute you can move on from this, you'll do just fine. And so this is kind of them brainwashing Angela, making her cold, being like, look, Angela, it's time to move on. The past is the past. And like, you need to like take the opportunities that are in front of you and become powerful and move on with your life. And Angela doesn't want to do that because she believes so strongly in getting justice for the leak. And she's maybe having some second thoughts because Philip Price is like, I just move on. It's not worth it. So then we cut to Ray meeting with Elliot in the diner. And then he tells Elliot, it's been 5 years, 7 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days since my wife passed away. And he says, after a few weeks of being paralyzed in my own fear, he's like, I started talking out loud. And he's like, I thought it was crazy, but it really helped. And then he says, you and me, Elliot's like, why are you telling me this? And he says, you and me are a lot more alike than you think, Elliot. Then we go to see Dom, who goes to see Romero's mom. And she's like, I already told everything to the police. She's like, I don't want to talk to you. And Dom is like, look, I can roll your joints for you. She's like, I know Romero used to roll them for you. I know you have arthritis and you can't roll them. She's like, I used to do it all the time. She's like, I'm pretty bomb at it. And then Romero's mom was like, well, why don't you come on in? And she's like, hey, did Romero have any friends? And she's like, no, he didn't have any friends except for that one chubby boy. She's talking about Mobley, and I'm like, he's not that. Mobley's not that big. We don't need to take shots at Mobley, but it's important here because there's mention that Mobley's mom has bad cataracts, so she can't see anything, and she's always high, so she's like, my mind is always dancing in the clouds. So, because Dom is like, did anyone come here on like the day Romero died? Did you see anyone? And she's like, I can barely see you in front of me. So even if there was a killer, had they done their research and known that Romero's mom was the only like lookout, she can't see anything, so they could have just come right in, similar to like what Mobley does when he comes and sees Romero. So that's an important piece there. But Dom goes rummaging through some boxes. She eventually finds the End of the World party flyer. So that is a big mistake. Elliot goes to Ray's office, and Ray asks him, why did you start that journal in the first place? Elliot says, I thought it was the secret to controlling my life. And there's a sad story of Ray telling Elliot about how his wife was the perfect driver. He's like, she always did 10 and 2. She stopped at every stop sign, every traffic light. She never went a mile over the speed limit. And then he goes, one day that just didn't matter anymore, which is presuming that someone else drunk driver, someone broke the rules of the road and crashed into her and killed her. And that's super sad and super relatable. In general, I luckily haven't had any issues like that, but super realistic issue, and you feel for Craig Robinson's character there. Ray then says, control is about as real as a one-legged unicorn taking a leak at the end of a double rainbow, which means control is an illusion, and you don't have control, is what he's telling him. But he's like, it's not about getting knocked down and then getting back up. He's like, it's about stumbling in the right direction. And he says, because keeping inside, Elliot's like, I don't want to talk about this. He puts on his hood, he tries to leave, and Ray is like, you don't want to do that. He's like, because keeping inside of you is not going to last. And Elliot says to us, it's not about the crash, it's about finding a fix until the next flaw. He's like, maybe Ray is right. Eventually, then, towards the end here, at the very end, Dom finds the F Society headquarters, and she just says, "You gotta be fucking kidding me." And she looks up, and it's F Society, and it couldn't be more obvious. Cut to black, season 2, episode 2, done. Okay, so for a score, I'm going to give this one 8.4. This was a good episode. It felt as much like a filler as a Mr. Robot episode can. There were still important parts here, but a lot of these themes we kind of were carrying over from the first, not only the first season, but the first episode of season 2. So I thought this was good. It's hard to find a bad episode of Mr. Robot. This was not a bad episode by any means. I just don't, any lower than 8.4 I think would have been too low. So I also didn't want to put this one super duper high because I think there are better episodes to come. But an 8.4, I think we get a lot of cool stuff. We get a brief thing with Elliot, but again, the Mr. Robot and Elliot dynamic is really great. And we see Mr. Robot really taking control here, really cracking or breaking through and getting to Elliot here and showing that he's losing control. We've seen this theme recurring of Elliot knowing that he thinks he's in control, he thinks he's in control. Just through season 2, just through 2 episodes, we've seen that he is losing control, and he has to write in his journal, "I'm in control, I'm in control." And it's like, dude, he's like denying it, and he's in the stages of denial, and he's like, "You're not in control, dude. It's Mr. Robot is breaking through, and he's getting through, and he's trying to save Elliot." And we're slowly finding that is the case. And then Ray just reiterates that in this episode where he says, control is as real as like he says, a unicorn taking a leak at the end of a double rainbow. He's saying there is no such thing as control because you think you have control, and then something like his wife dying in a car accident, completely out of his control and also his wife's control, shows you that shit happens, and that's life. And it's not about getting back up. It's about stumbling in the right direction. And Elliot's like, oh, maybe it is. Maybe I just gotta keep stumbling in the right direction. So that's a cool theme here. But I thought overall it was a good episode. Obviously the Romero death is big, but I thought I don't want to say they didn't really pay attention to it much, but I felt like that was a death, and then they kind of had a short bit about it and then almost moved on. But obviously Dom's investigating. This just pulls Dom more into the fold, and we'll see how that develops as she goes on. As she's kind of a likable character, but working on the opposite end, where she's working with the FBI to stop F Society, but the F Society characters are so likable that it's really two opposing, or a juxtaposition really for those characters. So yeah, 8.4 I think is a fair score. So for the White Rose Award, I got to give it to Elliot Alderson again, Rami Malek. I was thinking about giving it to Mr. Robot early in this episode, but after the beginning portion, he's not in the episode the rest of the way. But Rami is the star of the show here. I think this is the first time he's gone back to back with White Roses, because I'm pretty sure, and I should have checked before recording this, but I'm pretty sure Elliot got the White Rose for the opener as well. But yeah, Rami is, I guess, returned to form. He's the king. He's the cream of the crop in this episode. It's all about him, his facial expressions, his struggle. Most of this episode focuses on Elliot and his different perspectives and the people around him, how they interact with him, and how he doesn't have control unless he's on drugs and he's relying on them, and Mr. Robot's trying to tell him, you got to get that toxicity out of your system. So all really great stuff here, but Elliot, or Rami I should say, as always, shines as Elliot. Okay, so that's it. So friends, we are now 12 episodes down, 12 episodes deep. There's only 46 in the whole series, so we're making our way through. Thank you so much for joining me. Please go check out the first 11 episodes. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please like, comment, subscribe if you can. I'm still trying to get to those 100 followers so I can update my YouTube URL, but by now it's a lot harder to get to 100 subscribers than I thought it would be. So if you can, please subscribe on YouTube. Please ring the bell notification. Please check out my other content. Doesn't sound like a broken record here, but just to kind of self-promote here, we got new MCU content dropping. Those are my group reviews with a couple of buddies of mine, so those should be big. We got Star Wars up there. I just did Phantom Menace the other day. We got Jurassic Park coming. We got Harry Potter coming soon, less than 2 weeks now. We got Batman coming. We got John Wick up there, which is already done. We got a whole bunch of stuff up there, so please check out the other content if you don't mind. Liking all the stuff I do, just a big nerd. Basically just a 28, almost 29-year-old nerd. So, but until next time, goodbye, friend.